Hello, welcome everybody. Happy International Women's Day all over the world. I'm Jude Kelly. I founded the WOW movement, which is a global movement. And today I want to describe myself to you physically. I'm 5'2", I'm blonde, I got a blue blazer on, and I'm in my mid-60s. And I'm sitting behind a very colourful poster of a festival I directed many, many years ago. And I'm going to ask each of the speakers that we're going to hear from today to introduce themselves and what they look like. I'm white, cisgendered, and I live in London, but I come from the north of England. So perhaps I'll pass on, Winnie, to you.
Hi, I'm Winnie M Li. I am Chinese American and cisgendered. So I'm originally from New Jersey in America, but I live in London, although currently I'm in Wiltshire. So I'm 42 years old and I have long black hair. I'm wearing a light gray top, and I think I'm sitting in front of a fairly mediocre painting of Windsor Castle.
What do I?
To be honest.
Marai?
Hi, my name is Marai Larasi. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and they. I'm cisgender. I'm sitting in my family dining room in Jamaica. Behind me is a wooden cabinet with all sorts of glasses, including my parents' wedding present glasses. I'm Black, African, Caribbean. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, activist tee that says Million Women Rise. I'm in my 50s, and I'm also wearing a head wrap with blue and white and different patterns. That's me.
Fabulous. And Jo Bourke.
I'm Joanna Burke. I am actually here in Athens in Greece. I actually live in London, but I've got locked down here. I'm an historian. I teach at Birkbeck University of London. I am white, cisgendered, mid-50s. I think that should be true. Almost not mid-50s. And I'm sitting here wearing a black kind of jumper thing.
You're the Professor of History at Birkbeck University of London and a Fellow of the British Academy. You're the Gresham Professor of Rhetoric and the Principal Investigator of a Wellcome Trust-founded project entitled SHAME, Sexual Harm and Medical Encounters. You've won many prizes for the many books you've written, including Rape, a history from the 1860s to the present, What It Means to Be Human, The Story of Pain, From Prayer to Painkillers, and shortly to be published Sexual Violence, a Global History from the 1830s to the Me Too. So you've spent much of your adult life investigating the whole issue of the harm created by sexual encounter and also the myths around it. So this idea of a rape-free world, which I know I've heard you talk about, are you feeling that this is something real that we can grasp, that we can talk about, that we can aim for, and how?
I think it's really, really important that we do actually hold out this goal that we can create a rape-free world. I mean, I'm an historian, as you said, Jude, and one of the reasons I love history is because it enables us to look back in the past where things were not like they are today. And so we can look back and we can say, actually, you know, the high levels of sexual violence that we're experiencing today are not universal. There have been cultures that have had no rape or very, very low levels of sexual violence or sexual abuse. Why is that? What characterizes those societies? And therefore, how can we start moving towards them within our own society? I mean, for example, there is really, really good evidence that shows that in societies where there's high levels of gender equality, in societies where there's extremely low levels of militarism and military spending, rates of sexual violence are very low. I think when I work on this topic and I talk about rape-free worlds, people kind of look at me as though I'm some kind of, idealist, some kind of crazy person. But, we can work towards it. I think one of the chief things we need to start doing is sort of eradicating that debilitating myth that rape is inevitable within our societies. And we can do that, and we can do that primarily by creating coalitions with other people who are not like us. Maybe they do have different politics to us, but share this common goal, a rape-free world.
Mm-hmm. I'll come to you, Marai. So you are, an advocate for all kinds of areas to do with female justice, and in particular intersectional female justice. You're a community organiser, a consultant, and you've been in this field for over 25 years. Just to give your history, you were the executive director of IMCAN until 2019. You've been the co-chair of the End Violence Against Women Coalition, and you've been one of the top 100 women in the world talking about how power should be shifted and what we can all do to take our place in reframing power. So what's your view on this idea of a rape-free world? Is it something that you feel you can say with confidence your imagination can light on and feel is possible?
Hi, Jude, and it's awesome to be here with all of you. So I couldn't do this work if I couldn't imagine a rape-free world, right? I'm driven and motivated by the idea of social justice and equity or collective liberation. And that includes having a world where sexual violence, any form of sexual violence, doesn't exist and is a painful memory in terms of our human journey. For speaking from the place of being an African Caribbean woman born in London and thinking about our histories of being trafficked, the histories of enslavement, the plantation legacies of Black folk, in places including the Caribbean. Rape was such a fundamental part of how power over body and control was exercised. And it was interesting hearing Joanna speak about, societies where there are low levels of militarism, right? There is something about when people think about rape, too often what we're thinking about is the idea of, or this context of sex, right? That's the thing. People conflate some things around desire, etc. People aren't thinking about sexual harm, and people aren't thinking about it as deeply connected to the idea of power and domination. So for me, when we start to think about not owning body, not owning human beings, not needing to dominate, when we start to have a context, not just of just sexual equality and gender equality, but have that be intersectional. So we think about what drives one group of people to own another group of people's bodies as chattel, but also when we start to think about the basic kind of feminist premise of, can we just have some equity, right? Not as a wish, but as a demand. If we have a liberated society, if we have emancipated human beings, the whole idea of rape and the whole idea of power over body, for me, would have disappeared. Because what we would have done is we would have been coming from a place of intersectional equity, intersectional equality, and collective liberation. So I'm driven by this. I'm here for this, and I'm really appreciating that we're having this conversation. And I say this as an activist, and I say this as a survivor. So I'm coming at it from belly, and I'm coming at it from hands and head.
Mm-hmm. Winnie M Li, you're also an award-winning writer, because your novel Dark Chapter, which is the fictional retelling of your own real-life rape from victim to perpetrator perspectives, was been translated into 10 languages. Yes, please do see. Hold it up. It won the Guardian's Not the Booker Prize, nominated for an Edgar Award, and the Best First Novel Award. And I remember reading it in proof copy. You were kind enough to send it me and go, what do you think? And I just thought then, an example of turning something which you never wish would have happened into something which becomes something which helps so many other people. So the generosity of the survivor being able to come to a moment when they can share that is a really important thing. And of course, you then went on to found Clear Lines, which is the UK's first ever festival addressing sexual assault and consent. And you're going to be writer in residence indeed on the project that we're going to talk about, on the Shame Project, which is fantastic. But when at WOW we started the rape testimonies, the intention was to try to say to all of us, the more we are encouraged to believe that it is our shame, that it's a personal problem, that something we did, something that we didn't think about to do right or did wrong or whatever, the more we perpetuate the idea that actually it's a personal experience only and not systemic and nothing to do with the way society thinks. And the rape testimonies were to say, step outside that shame and allow us to own our stories whilst saying that this is not how it ought to be. And I think that removing shame becomes the first opportunity we all get to examine the political framework in which rape and sexual assault really sits, and the historical one. So when you wrote that novel to change, like take your personal experience and turn it into something that was sort of fictionalized, did you think this is something which could be prevented by societies and maintained in terms of prevention? Did you think rape-free world is possible?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think now that it's possible. When I started writing the book, I only started writing it about 5.5 years after my own assault, and it took me that amount of time to kind of recover and rebuild my own life before I was in the right point in my life to address it, as fiction or even as a writer. But now, of course, yeah, I wouldn't be doing the work that I do now if I wasn't trying to strive towards a rape-free world. And what you said about shame is absolutely fundamental, because I guess for my own recovery, I had to kind of realize, this thing that happened to me, this very violent rape, which happened, I was walking through a park in the middle of the day, Saturday afternoon, in the springtime, and I was approached by a boy who then followed me, and then he violently assaulted and raped me. That thing which you never expect to have happen to you in some ways has nothing to do with my own behavior. And even after, for quite a long time after that assault, I kept on thinking like, man, that was me being stupid. Like I shouldn't have spoken to that boy. I should have turned around. I should have stopped hiking. And of course, I had to have a police officer tell me like, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You went on a walk. This person followed you, and this person decided to do that to you. And that is the only reason why that act of sexual violence happened to you. It wasn't because you were stupid. It wasn't because you were headstrong and you wanted to go on that walk. When we always hear like women shouldn't go walking on their own. And, that's, for me, that's ridiculous. I was 29 when that happened to me, and I had been traveling on my own pretty much since I was 18. And there'd always been, my mom had always been afraid of what would have happened to me. But I saw incredible places and I met incredible people. It was very, very important for forming my own sense of self. To be able to go on those travels. And I would never want another girl or woman to feel that they could never go traveling on their own because of the fear of what could happen to them. But then, of course, it did happen to me. So when you ask about rape-free world, I mean, for me, that would be amazing, because that would mean nobody would ever have that fear of being able to travel, and they'd be able to go on incredible journeys and learn so many things, and and do all the journeying that men and boys often get to do without ever having to think about that fear. And then if I think about, how much that act of violence affected my life, I was 29 when that happened. I'm 42 now. I spent, a good 5-6 years recovering from it. And then I decided to write the novel and become an activist. And I've spent all that time since then being an activist around this issue. And that's a lot of time and effort that I've put into that issue, right? And it's great that, I guess people benefit from it, and it's great that it's inspired other people. But if we didn't have things like rape in this world, all that time and effort I put into working around that issue could be going towards something else, right? And if you compound that across the population, all the women and boys and men and all the people in this world who've been affected by rape, and it is very, very high level of prevalence, as we know, they could be doing other things with their lives, right? I could be writing so many other kinds of books, right? Marai could be using her incredible skills towards, something like a green economy or something like that, or all the other things, all the problems in this world that need to be fixed. We could be focusing on that and not on trying to fix sexual violence. So even from an economic perspective, if you talk about productivity, we'd be so much more of a productive society if many members of our society weren't having to deal with the consequences of being victims of this kind of crime. You know, it took me many years and, you know, a lot of therapy, and, you know, my finances suffered, you know, my relationship suffered, family suffered as a result of these kinds of experiences. So I think we'd be a much stronger society, a more productive one, if we lived in a rape-free world.
Yeah. And of course, like so many of the other issues that come out of inequality, the people who are the survivors tend to be the ones that are doing most of the fighting, most of the talking, most of the analysis, etc., as if the rest of society doesn't have to concern itself with it, which is, again, a terribly unproductive way of conducting issues that should belong to us all, do belong to us all. Joanna, can I just go back on this issue of history and assumption? So, you know, I grew up being told, well, you can never get rid of rape. It's just the way it is. You know, animal instincts, predatory instincts, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Yes, very much conflated with the idea of men need sex, not, you know, about power, and not understanding as an early age anything about rape as a weapon of war, rape as a weapon of torture, rape as a means of suppression, not knowing any of those things. Now I do know all of those things, but nevertheless I still think the narrative is, well, it's always been like in history. Can you just talk us through a bit about why we have such a bad grasp on history around, well, this and many other issues? What should we be learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're really right there, that there is a kind of lack of understanding about sexual violence as it is historically and as it is in different countries. And you know, these rape myths that sort of permeate our society and permeate our language are really, really so deeply embedded in our culture. You know, ideas such as you can't rape the person who's resisting, that women lie, that no sometimes means yes, that some kinds of coercive sex are not really that bad. I mean, these are deeply embedded ideas in society. And I mean, I find it really positive, though, to look back and see the ways that survivors, that feminists have sort of approached these topics and fought for a rape-free world in the past. And I take great inspiration, particularly from, you know, the early civil rights activists, female feminist activists in the States, who, of course, really are the predecessors to the Me Too movement, because these were the women who actually stood up and fought against slavery and articulated the complexity of sexual violence that they were experiencing within their societies, but also had this kind of hope for a future and this idea that it is something that could be addressed, so long as you address all of those different layers of oppression. In other words, it's not simply enough to address one layer of oppression, misogyny, for example. It's really crucial to address all those levels, because they are all actually tied in. And Marai is completely right when she draws attention to this issue, that if we are to successfully forge this rape-free world, it is all of those different layers of oppression that have to be examined and have to be debunked.
But just to stay with you a little bit longer, Joanna, you also said that when you say rape-free world to people, they treat you like you're a bit crazy. They think you're an idealist. Well, actually, there's nothing wrong with being an idealist, but presumably they mean you're being romantic, that it can never come about. So what do you then say about the things that would make it possible?
To really forge a rape-free world, we do need to explore and debunk all of the various layers of power, all of those vectors of oppression that dominate our society. So in other words, it's not simply enough to address one sort of layer of oppression, let's say misogyny. In order to really make a difference, we need to address a whole range of things: sexism, racism, colonialism, heteronormativity, economic inequality. All of these things are actually tied and linked to each other. And I think one of the things that I really think we need to, as activists or as people who are wanting a better world, I think we need to think really seriously about how we can generate coalitions between people who may not necessarily agree, or they won't agree on so many different things, based on identity politics, based on our race, our class, and all those issues. But we can agree on this one thing. And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of my sort of political as well as intellectual and academic labor is trying to also say, well, actually, we need to include men, we need to include boys in this movement, we need to really be as open as possible and in forging these different coalitions. And we can't really afford, if you like, to alienate any particular group within society. And by doing that, I do think that we can start making some really positive moves forward, because each of us, each one of us in our local contexts have spheres of influence, have our friends, have ways of changing in small ways what our society, our local community looks like. So, in other words, I think when people say, well, what shall I be doing? Full stop. The answer is what we should be doing is using our own local specific context, whether we're an academic, a writer, an activist, a teacher, a police woman, a laborer, unemployed, wherever we are situated, we can make that local difference, and local differences translate into global revolutions.
Mm-hmm. So, Marai, I just see the sun coming up in Jamaica, I think, through your window at this particular moment. No, it's lovely. It's lovely. We all wish we had it wherever we are, at the sun. But you have both the UK perspective and the Jamaican perspective, and looking at how the societies all deal with violence, and violence transmitted into sexual harm. When you look for ways of unlocking, as Joanna says, different parts of it, do you think that we have, between us all, enough understanding of intersexual issues to be able to form the alliances that Joanna's talking about?
I want us to, but I am struggling. So to Joanna's point about kind of building coalition, I think that's critical. If we don't create connections and coalitions across social justice movements, then we will continue to work in our silos, which are problematic and which create a huge amount of difficulty. Those silos, however, have come out of sometimes a need for a sense of safety and the need for a sense of belonging and a need for not spaces that have no power dynamics, but spaces where you can navigate those power dynamics more easily and safely. So if I think about work in the UK around violence against women and girls, spaces that have come out of women's movement building have been really critical in terms of addressing harm, in terms of survivor-led responses, in terms of safety and so forth. But I do want those spaces, and within that we have whole services and sectors that are focused specifically, for example, on global majority women who are minoritized in the UK, and if I think about those spaces, and if I think about the work more broadly, I want those spaces to be more intersectional, and I want there to be connection. But I also want to, if I'm engaging with, for example, men about issues related to sexual violence, I want those men to take account of their power in an interaction. So very often in feminist movement spaces, you'll have a woman who's been saying this, you'll be presenting, you'll have a woman who might say something, she might be up there for 15 minutes saying what she's saying. Dude comes up and says the same thing, and everybody claps the dude and gives him the best props because he's a guy saying those things. So there's also how, or we have to think about the power dynamics. We have to think about the work that we do with self. We have to think about our own place of entitlement. For me, for example, as someone who's non-disabled, who's cis, how do I bring my solidarity to my trans, sisters, my trans siblings? How do I bring my solidarity to my disabled sisters, for example? How do I do, if we don't deal with ourselves, then it affects our ability to come in solidarity. And if we can't come in solidarity and meaningful allyship, then what does that mean for movement building? What does that mean for transformative approaches, say, to ending all forms of sexual violence? So there is work that is needed with self, always. Why do Black folk, why global majority folk have to do the labor all the time about racial justice? That's white people's work. We end up doing it all the time. Why are women and girls, you know, and non-binary folk doing so much of the labor around sexual violence and sexual harm? We know that boys and men are affected, but we know that there's a disproportionate impact on the female body. There's a disproportionate impact on women. There's a disproportionate impact on these bodies. That work does need to be held and done. Huge amount of work is needed by men. I absolutely want that to happen, but I want it to be done in a way that involves care, that involves accountability, that involves, men's own engagement with their entitlement to our bodies. Like, there is too much, the harming of us is too much a norm. Shouldn't be, but it's too much of a norm across all our societies.
So, I think like a lot of the conversations that we have with WOW are at a very simple level. One's trying to say, you may never have raped anybody or harmed anybody. But if you have any element where you think, well, I like the power I have over somebody else in another way, or I'm glad that I'm white, not black, or I'm not very interested in disability issues because I'm not disabled. All of this sort of maintains the idea that having power is exciting and good or convenient, and that you're then kind of complicit in a society that allows other people to have less power. Now, just put that way, what I suppose my feeling is that your point, we have to do an awful lot of learning ourselves, is that we have to keep on redistributing power, because I think people have recognised that rape and sexual harm is put onto women and men as a way of forcing powerlessness onto them and exerting power. And that the very notion of it's okay to exert more power than is something that we need to examine. And that's very, very fundamental in the way that our societies so far have been made to think that power is good and powerlessness is bad, which is why you feel so much of a sense of shame when you have been exposed as powerless through being raped or sexually harmed. So it's a lot of work, but then so it was to do a lot of work to believe that everybody was entitled to be educated. That's a lot of work if you're looking at a history where people thought that most people were not even entitled to learn to read and write. So, these massive transformations of thinking have happened in society, and that's why it's important not to assume it's just romantic. Winnie, you sort of started this idea after you had written the book, but during that period you were also working on this festival around, sexual harm. And one of the forerunners to the things that we're going to work on big time now. Did you get the feeling that people were relieved, women and men together, to be able to talk about stuff openly and in a kind of, I wouldn't say celebratory, perhaps the wrong word, but in a way that allows for recovery and allows for survival to be celebrated?
Yeah, and I would use the word celebratory because, in some ways, clear lines when we started it, and I came up with the idea kind of on the 7th anniversary of my own rape in 2015. It was about celebrating the amazing art that's being created and that by survivors, right? So I noticed there was a lot of different kind of theater work that was being created, one-person plays, like very powerful monologues. I'd been reading a lot of books. I'd been, seeing stand-up comedy that addressed these issues. So I realized there was kind of quite a lot of creativity that was being harnessed by survivors to share their experiences and to try to, I suppose, educate the wider world about the human experience behind rape and sexual assault. But then when I spoke to some of these theater makers, they were saying, they were running against problems in terms of getting their work seen, because venues didn't want to be staging plays about rape and sexual assault. There was a festival called the Unheard Festival that had done kind of a 4-day festival of theater. And then I realized, well, there's lots of other art forms out there that are addressing it. And because it was a scary issue, and again, this was pre #MeToo trending, right? This was in 2015. A lot of arts venues were saying, well, you know, who's this going to appeal to, really? Like, who is the audience? And for me, as a survivor, I knew there was a huge audience out there, because there's a lot of people out there who've been affected by sexual assault and abuse. So I wanted to create a place where this art could be seen and by audiences that cared about it, and where we could speak about it in a very open way and have a Q&A session with the theater makers or the filmmakers where they can interact with the audience. And we could talk about the ways that we're using art and creativity to share these experiences in a productive way that allows us a sense of community and camaraderie. Because I feel like oftentimes, and it's obviously the landscape's changed now in 2021, but a lot of times you'll have, you know, conferences where it's, you know, police officers and social workers that address the issue as professionals talking about it in a very dry manner. Probably have academic conferences, Joanna, that you could speak about, where it's academics who do this research who speak about it in a kind of dry manner as well. But I felt like there was never actually a place for the survivor's voice to be heard in a way that wasn't pitying, in a way that championed the survivor and championed the survivor's voice and their ability to interpret their own experience and their insight. And I think that's something we still need to always have. We always need to have a survivor-centered dialogue where we realize the kind of knowledge and experience that a survivor brings is something that could help us improve our society. You know, there's something happening right now in Northern Ireland, the Gillen Report, where Sir John Gillen has interviewed a number of different people, including survivors, on how the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland could be improved to deal with rape and sexual assault cases. And these are people who've not had justice or had very middling senses of justice and had very traumatic experiences with the criminal justice system. And I think if we just listened to that experience, we would know how to improve the criminal justice system, which would then lead to more people reporting and more accountability for perpetrators, which could then start to eliminate or bring down the levels of sexual violence and hopefully lead to a rape-free world. So having a kind of celebratory, survivor-centered space or dialogue is, I think, key to achieving what we want to achieve in this world.
So I think that I just came off a phone call this morning to launch WOW Pakistan, and they have a phrase that they're using for the festival called Unmasked, which is not about antiviral masks or non-masks. It's to do with saying, take away the kind of the veil of shame, the mask of shame about all kinds of things. And stepping on those ideas, which WOW is really, which you bring together all these subjects people find difficult and say, actually, it's exciting and thrilling to talk about them because that's the way that you can get progress. Joanna, can we talk a little bit now about the Shame Project itself, which is a kind of huge research project, but which is then turning into this festival that we're going to do together over 3 years, is a real shift of emphasis, isn't it, into trying to make it something which all of us in ordinary civvy clothes get to discuss and think about.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why we're running these shameless festivals, because, I mean, the project Shame, as you say, is looking at a particular kind of approach to sexual violence, medical and psychiatric approaches. But of course, you know, sexual violence, sexual abuse affects us all. It affects us physically, it affects our friends, it affects our psychological health. So these are things we really want to look at. And I think the celebratory thing, I was very interested in the discussion that you had a few minutes ago about the use of that word celebratory. I think that if we, you know, fighting against sexual violence, talking about sexual violence, sharing our experiences of sexual violence can be is extremely dispiriting and depressing at times. And I think we do need to do that, but the arts provide us with a way of using those emotions in more creative ways, giving us a different kind of language to talk about our own experiences or the experiences of friends and family. And that's really very important because it enables a wide range of people to talk really freely and to experiment in ideas about, you know, how we can create this rape-free world. And that's why I think it's important, these festivals.
Mm-hmm. So you know, these cliches like if you can't see it, you can't be it, or seeing is believing. we can't see a rape-free world yet, but we can imagine it if we take away the anxiety that it's kind of foolish or could never come about. And I think we have to aim for that idea of the imagination giving us the landscape, and then we can then step into it, work out how to get there. So the first Shameless Festival is going to be in November. We're all concocting it now. It'll be a partnership with WOW, and then we're going to do the second one in Rio, where we have a huge WOW festival and tremendous women leaders there. But we've talked already on this call about the fact that we need both safe spaces, but we also need fully intersectional spaces, and we need to include men and boys who are themselves subject to sexual violence, as well as being a big part of the reason why sexual violence is so prevalent. So it's a complex map that we're walking around here. We want you all to follow it, so we'll be able to give you more details about the Shameless Festival the nearer it gets to happening. But in the meantime, as we're coming to an end of this, I just wanted to say really that this issue of labour, that Marai said, why are you asking the survivors to do all the labour? Why are you asking women of colour to do all the labour? Why are you asking black women to do all the labour? Why are you asking people who are the most likely to have the least resources to do all the labour? And anybody watching this who has just kind of come on because they're quite interested, or it's sort of just what happens to fill in a slot in their day, the call out really is get more involved. Think about your own workplace, your own social frameworks, your own society, and work out what you see is being allowed to happen, what has become the norm, what is permissible and acceptable, because unless it's challenged, then we're all complicit in it. But what we can do is say it would be a wonderful place to have a rape-free world. And just like so many other things that human progress has managed to achieve, why aren't we racing towards it faster? So that's the challenge for today. International Women's Day. Let's race towards a rape-free world faster and together. And if anything on this conversation has been difficult for you, we're putting up some support systems now that we have available. And please, on reflecting about this conversation, then go on and see some other things that we're doing all during the day. Plenty of very joyful things, I think, including how to fix your toilet. So, it's we can do the very high level things, but we can also do the drains. So thanks everybody here from Jamaica, from Greece, from Windsor, Wiltshire and from Kent. Have a happy International Women's Day.
वाओ पाकिस्तान में खुश आमदीद।
वाओ नेपाल में स्वागत छ।
वाओ बांग्लादेश से स्वागतम।
Welcome to WOW Apollo.
欢迎来到 WOW 高雄。
G'day! Welcome to WOW in Australia.
Hello! Welcome to WOW in the UK.
Wow İstanbul'a hoş geldiniz.
Wow, that makes me feel so emotional just to see that energy and that determination. I'm Jude Kelly. I founded the WOW Women of the World movement over 10 years ago, and I did it because I really want gender justice in this century, preferably in my lifetime, but certainly for my daughter and my granddaughter. It's been an incredible time. COVID has made us all see so vividly what happens when you have intersectional injustice, but we also can see the glimmerings of fantastic acts of creativity and resilience where we can see change could be possible right across the world if we see it as systemic and we do it together. For these many years, we've worked with wonderful partners like the Hedges de Marais in Brazil, the Apollo Theatre in New York, the non-for-profit of One Mind in Australia, and the British Council across South Asia. And the result is brilliant festivals and also a kind of network of women, girls, non-binary, trans, who really believe that we can make change happen. And of course, this is about all genders, boys and men too. They are part of this festival, they are part of making change happen. So this month, We've got, coming out of the UK, our 3-week festival online. We've also got festivals in New York, we've got festivals in Australia, we've got festivals in Nepal, in Pakistan, and we're also doing big think-ins. They're moments when all people come together, intersectional, all ages, all backgrounds, to think about what their lived experience means in terms of a festival content, and also to make sure things are both locally relevant but draw on the stories of the whole world. We're connected, and that's what we must understand. All of this injustice is systemic, and all of change needs to be done systemically as well. So these think-ins are both celebratory and revelatory. They really make people see things in a way that they hadn't done before, because you're working alongside people that you probably wouldn't meet in your normal friendship circle. And this is what we need. We need to unlearn things that we've been taught and learn things that we didn't know before. And that makes for a very different set of propositions. So after those think-ins happen, there'll be festivals in Taiwan, there'll be festivals in Western Australia, there'll be festivals in Bangladesh, and of course this movement just keeps going and going. All these fantastic festivals, 157 we've done so far, well, they're great moments, but they also string together to make a movement. And we're putting our hands out to you too, to say, please join us, be part of this movement, be happy about being an activist if you're not one already. We are standing on the shoulders of people who got us votes, they got us education, they got us sexual freedom, they got us so many things. And isn't it our turn to keep this going and to make change happen in our lifetime? I think so. I know you do too, so please join us.
I see you mothers, I see you daughters, I see you sisters.